This is a prelude to the comments that were taped earlier. My exposition was recorded first, then the examples, and after hearing the examples, I realized that much more explanation was needed. Dubs of small sections of music written over the past 37 years are included with the examples. I was not sure that this could be done successfully, and decided after the attempt that it was at least not a total failure. So first you will hear both a verbal explanation and a chromelodian demonstration, and much of the time the appropriate small excerpt of recorded music. However, I must point out problems in electronic reproduction which tend to negate much of my thesis. There is a phase problem in the sounding of even a single reed of a reed organ, much like the phase effect in the sound of a bowed string with no vibrato, and this phenomenon seems exaggerated by electronic reproduction. I sometimes feel that players of bowed string instruments unconsciously use vibrato in order to obfuscate the phase effect. Also, the motor of the recording instrument insists on introducing its own little quavering quality. The result is that, between the phase effect exaggerated by electronics and the quavering motor, parts of this tape will sound as though someone had lost his mind over the Vox Angelica. There is the further consideration that the examples of music, taped over a period of some 17 years, were recorded on 15 or 20 instruments, all at slightly different motor speeds. And so, instead of just one 7/4, let's say, a particular tone of a particular frequency, there may be the sounds of 15 7/4s, all at slightly different frequencies. But within one small section, the 7/4, as an example, retains its integrity. The direction in which I have been going the past 44 years has much in common with the activities and actions of primitive man as I imagine him. Primitive man found magical sounds in the materials around him, in a reed, a piece of bamboo, a particular piece of wood held in a certain way, or a skin stretched over a gourd or a tortoise shell, some resonating body. He then proceeded to make the object, the vehicle, the instrument, as visually beautiful as he could. His last step was almost automatic, the metamorphosis of the magical sounds and the visual beauty into something spiritual. They became fused with his everyday words and experience, his ritual, drama, religion, thus lending greater meaning to his life. These acts of primitive man become the trinity of this work: magical sounds, visual form and beauty, experience, ritual. Meaningfulness must have roots. It is not enough to feel that one's roots extend back only a decade or a century. It is my strong belief that the human race has known and abandoned magical sounds, visual beauty, and experience ritual more meaningful than those now current. I must therefore decline to limit the dimensions of my rather intense beliefs by the modernly specialized word music. I believe devoutly that this specialty must become less specialized for the sake of its own survival. The experiential, ritualistic, dramatic area has constituted a very large part of my belief and work. And as for imaginative and sculptural forms of instruments, I have easily given as much time to this endeavor as to intonation, which is basically the content of this tape. Almost every one of my many instruments has been built and rebuilt, up to as many as 9 times, for all or even just one of the following reasons: A, good aesthetic form; B, acoustical validity; C, musical practicality. However, I shall pass over, with compelling sadness and with no further comment, easily 2/3 of my life's work, to discuss and demonstrate intonation, and I shall narrow this down to a particular kind of intonation, just, and narrow it even further to the kind of just intonation that I call monophonic, that is, the genesis from one. News stories and even reviews have almost consistently latched onto the number 43 as though this were somehow the touchstone of my life. It is not. It is in fact about the one-half truth of the one-fourth factor. It is totally misleading. Even on instruments of fixed pitch, I do not necessarily limit myself to 43 just monophonic tones. To explain further would consume too much time. The examples on this tape are from my own music, and are all primarily demonstrated on my chromelodians, which are converted old-fashioned reed organs. Many of them, in the actual music, are written for different instruments, percussion and plucked strings very largely. These examples are transcribed for the chromelodians because the relationships are heard in clear, sustained tones. The examples. I would not even call them a few high spots. No one particular work out of 37 years of music is discussed all the way through. These are in the nature of hit or miss examples, and whether they are high or low spots I do not know. One further word of introduction about the language of intonational theory. The only clear, logical, rational terms are numbers, the relationships of numbers, that is, frequency ratios or the ratios of parts of sounding bodies. Ancient peoples in many parts of the world knew musical numbers. Modern man, including modern American music schools, persist in not knowing musical numbers. On the contrary, through my lifetime, I have seen how they jealously guard their precious misconceptions, and this, ironically, in a so-called scientific age. Part of the time I shall translate the accurate language of numbers into the current nomenclature of mumbo-jumbo. Most of the time I shall not. The word octave, for example, is a palpable imprecision. I shall continue to use octave to describe a physical distance on the modern keyboard. I shall not use it to indicate that oral quantity, but rather the correct term, the ratio 2:1. The terms septimal whole tone, septimal minor third, septimal tritone sound delightfully erudite, but in fact the terms 8/7, 7/6, 7/5 are far more meaningful. The so-called scale of Olympos, pentatonic, is also a widely used Japanese scale. In pure intonation, two pure triads are available within this scale, but in my use of it I have chosen to be more austere. The enharmonic scale of Archytas in true intonation. The two tetrachords are separated by 3 twos, or, in the Alice in Wonderland terms of the present day, perfect fifths. Here again, in using the scale, I have employed true triads implicit in the scale. Here is a Pythagorean scale derived from transposed successions of 3/2s, which I seldom use as a scale, but which is implicit in the monophonic system. Now the two tetrachords, a 3/2 apart, and as long as one sticks to 3/2s, the ear will dig. If he resorts to triads, however, the ear will not dig. Here in complete contrast is the Ptolemaic intense diatonic which so enamored the men of the Renaissance. Now the two tetrachords in parallel 3/2s. Finally, the smooth, pure triads. This is Ptolemy's Equable diatonic, derived from the arithmetical proportion. Now the two tetrachords in parallel 3/2s. Although there are two true triads in the scale, I have not used them in the one piece of music where I appropriated this sequence. In the score Wind Song, I used one of the degrees as a rhythmic accompaniment. Whimsically, it might be called a subdominant drone. Just one more scale. This Terpander's Hexatonic, according to Kathleen Schlesinger, which is also derived from an arithmetical proportion. I am including this because it is a complete hexad tonality, which is my basic tonality concept. True identities 1 through 11, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 in O tonality, that is, major, and true identities 1 through 11 in U tonality, that is, minor. This latter would be correctly expressed 1, then 1/3 of 1, followed by 1/5, 1/7, 1/9, 1/11. This scale will be played as a sustained chord, starting with a low 3 identity of 11/8 U tonality and proceeding with the 5, 1, 7, 11 identities with the 9th identity at the top. There are true complete hexads, 1 through 11, in 14 of the 28 tonalities I use, and chords through 9, 7, or 5 in the remaining 14. The monophonic scale, if conceived as a scale, is not equal. There are no equal aural increments between successive degrees. This is not possible in any system of just intonation. The largest interval between degrees is indicated by fast beats, the smallest by slow beats. Here, in successive intervals, are the largest and the smallest. The first, nearly 2/5 of a semitone, the next, about 1/7 of a semitone. An inexorable accident inheres within the scale an absolutely true triad, related 4, 5, 6, and a 12-tone equally tempered triad on the same fundamental. The 5 identity is of course true in the first triad, and in the second it is 12-tone equal temperament with a falsity of less than 1/100th of a semitone, which is probably more accurate than most pianos. The 3/2 is true in both triads. If the second triad were played on a piano, theoretically perfectly in tune, it would be false by about 1/50th of a semitone. The tempered triad is strangely uneasy, and no wonder. It wants nothing so much as to go away and sit down someplace. It wants nothing so much as resolution. And speaking of resolutions, this is one from page 186 of my book, Genesis of a Music. A resolution that travels narrow resolving distances, also from page 186, from 3/2 tonality to 1/1 tonality. The resolving chord contains an entire hexad, 1, 5, 3, 7, 9, 11, from the bottom up, and the final chord is a quintad with 1 doubled, 3, 1, 9, 5, 7, 1. In the reverse of this, from 4/3 U tonality to 1/1 U tonality, page 187, The dissonant or equivocal difference tones that are always so marked in tones of a sustained nature tend to muddy the true relationships. In O tonality, the difference tones are very benign and constantly support the true relationships. However, here is the reverse. This next resolution may sound familiar, but there are some unusual subtleties. For one thing, all the chords are true, and for another, the lowest voice resolves by the ratio 199, about a sixth of a semitone. Just one more resolution. This is an example sent to me many years ago by Fox Strangways, who, if he were alive today, would probably be called a musicologist, God rest his soul. Purportedly, this resolution proves that just intonation is not even desirable, and this is supposedly demonstrated by the fact that two different A's, to use the current nomenclature, are required. It will be heard three ways. First, with the right tone, 10-9, highest voice, in the antepenultimate, tied to the wrong tone in the penultimate. Next, with the wrong tone, 9-8, in the antepenultimate, tied to the right tone in the penultimate. Finally, the very simple adjustment of a fifth of a semitone between 10-9 and 9-8 between the two chords in question so that the chords are true throughout. It is so easy, so innocent. I quote from my book, page 193, "Equal temperament is a current habit, as is also the scope for modulation which it allows. Composers can think only in equal temperament for just one reason, because it is all they have got to think in. Music systems are made valid and workable by significant music." And I would add to this right now that music systems that are not made valid by significant music are so many scraps of paper in a whirlwind. I am more inclined to think in terms of what I call tonal flux, rather than in the usual implications of progression or modulation. Here is an example, diagrammed on page 188 of my book, which I have used in at least two pieces of music. Two triads, with each voice moving by about a third of a semitone in one direction or the other, 8-7 O tonality and 7-4 U tonality. This tonal flux is used in the letter, the setting of a letter from a hobo friend. Cincinnati, Ohio, October 2nd, 1935. Hello, pal.
Gee, I was glad to hear from you. Believe it or not, pal, I just received your letter today.
It is also used in the third chorus of Oedipus, but the progression from 7/4 U tonality to 8/7 O tonality and back is somewhat more complex.
Insolence begets the tyrant, and by vanity he rises to the summit, and is then struck down to the abyss.
Another diagrammed example, also on page 188, involving even smaller intervals, is from 11/8 U tonality to 16/11 O tonality. I have used this tonal flux many times. Here is an example from the antiphony of Oedipus that is similar. There are 3 chords, or their implications, impossible to translate from numbers, and a kind of resolution. The high voice moves downward, first by a sixth of a semitone, then by a 9/8, one of the just whole tones. The final chord introduces the 11 identity, middle tone, of 8/5 O tonality. O crowding woods and narrow paths where 3 roads meet. I want to interject something here about tonal senses. It has been repeated for years, probably centuries, by theorists who never made an experiment in their entire lives, that just intonation is musically impractical because it does not allow a tone to be taken in more than one sense. This is sheer poppycock. Again, from the same sequence, the antiphony. Female chorus voices, sustained by the cathara, hold a straight 1/1, while adapted cello and string bass, both in other registers, play the sequence 8/7 O tonality, 7/4 U tonality, 16/9 O tonality, 11/8 U tonality, 16/11 O tonality, 9/8 U tonality. Every one of these 6 chords holds an 11 identity in these 6 different tonalities. Again, O crowding woods and narrow paths where 3 roads meet. The tones that can be taken in several senses are rather obvious. 1/1 is the 7th identity, 7th in another tonality, 9th identity, 11th identity, 11th in another, and at the end it is still another 9th identity in that order.
Forecast me of the rift
further examples of multiple senses. From Dark Brother, a setting of Thomas Wolfe's essay God's Lonely Man. In the first example, the highest tone is taken as the 5 identity in 1611 O tonality, and left as the 11 identity in 5/4 U tonality. In the third chord, the 2 lower tones are taken as the 1 and 3 identities of 6/5 O tonality, and left as the 5 and 1 identities of 3/2 U tonality. The 5th and 6th chords have no common tones, but the low tone of the 5th chord moves upward by a 7th of a semitone. But the old refusals drop away, and we who were lost are found again.
We who were lost are found again. And we who
In the second example, the low tone is taken as the 5 identity in 1/1 O tonality, next as the 1 identity in 5/4 U tonality, then as the 3 identity in 15/8 U tonality. In the fourth chord, the low tone moves upward about half a semitone. Until our hearts are corrupted, our talent wasted, and our hope gone.
until our hearts were corrupted, our talent wasted, and our hope gone, have won our lives back.
In the final example from this work, the high tone in the second chord is taken as the 3 identity of 11/8 U tonality and left as the 11 identity in 4/3 O tonality. In the fifth chord, the middle tone is taken as the 9 identity in 8/7 O tonality and left as the 7 identity in 9/8 U tonality. The passage ends on 8/5 O tonality. Have we not known triumph, joy, and glory on this earth?
Have we not known triumph, joy, and glory on this earth? And will it not be again with me as it was then? If you come back to me.
Some melodic subtleties where intoned words are involved. The first is from The Street, a setting from Willard Motley's Knock on Any Door. The example on the chromelodian is abbreviated, and the registers are not the same as in the music. Down Maxwell Street, where the prostitutes stand in the gloom-clustered doorways.
prostitutes stand in the gloom, cluster doorways.
Now an example from U.S. Highball, a musical account of a transcontinental hobo trip. Back to the freights for you, boy.
Back to the freights for you, boy.
The following examples are from The Bewitched, a dance satire, and involve passages with subtleties generated for purely melodic reasons, not for either verbal or harmonic reasons. If one considers the starting tone a D, then two Ds are involved, separated, if played consecutively, they aren't, by about a quarter of a semitone. Two Gs are also involved. If played consecutively, they aren't. They are separated by about a fifth of a semitone. Now the same sequence in reverse, but with the same impulse pattern. Also from The Bewitched, a section titled "A Soul Tormented by Contemporary Music Finds a Humanizing Alchemy," a passage of an entirely different character. Again, subtleties for purely melodic considerations. Also the reverse, same rhythmic pattern. One final example from The Bewitched. One of the harmonic canons, with 44 strings, is tuned as follows: 22 consecutive strings plucked in one direction. Now the other 22 consecutive strings plucked in the opposite direction. Now all 44 strings with both hands plucking the same consecutive strings in opposite directions. The registers are somewhat different from those in the music. In all my later work since Oedipus in 1951, my music is more bound up in the integrity, the diamond of each instrument, separately and together. And although analyses can be made in chromelodian terms, the results are so different in respect of sound and pattern, in fact so wrong, that the originals become unrecognizable. An example of this untransferable thing is in the tuning and technique of harmonic canon 1, a plucked string instrument with 88 strings. 44 of these strings are on one plane, 44 on another. The planes intersect, and the musician may play on either plane separately or on both together at the point of intersection. These are the 29 lowest strings at intersection as tuned for Revelation in the Courthouse Park. A different tuning on the same instrument, harmonic canon 1, is used in a more recent work, and on the seventh day petals fell in Petaluma. In the same work, a chordal sequence with chromalodion 1 and catharo 1, supporting it with full hexads. I am offering this because it is an example of pure extended consonance. Dissonance will come later. The ordinary reed organ or harmonium has two sets of reeds. Here is one section of 24 consecutive levers or keys that I will play downward, chromatically if you like. Now exactly the same 24 lever section, playing downwards, chromatically, using the second set of reeds. And finally, the same 24 lever section, playing downwards, chromatically, using both sets of reeds together. Each tone of the one set is in a small number frequency relationship to the other set in just intonation, of course. From Revelation in the Courthouse Park, which is based on the Bacchae of Euripides. I've used this section of the chromalodion motivationally in many places, in both Oedipus and Revelation. Here is one, Revelation, where Tiresias warns the young king of the implications in his name, penthos, sorrow. Just two tonalities are really involved, but it would be misleading, and it would abnegate all subtleties, melodic and harmonic, if they were called a kind of F minor and a kind of D flat minor.
Beware, Pentheus, the echo of that name.
Later, the mother Agave appears in a dream sequence, and Dionysus sings, Agave, I bring you your son, reach out your arms. Here the same theme is used, penthos, sorrow, and it ends the same way, but the progression or resolution continues with two other chords, and it is rather futile to try to pin them down to witch doctor terminology unless C 1/2 sharp major is, for example, meaningful.
unusual young man, and you go to a strange and unusual experience. Sorrow.
It is my reward.
Yes, a fame ascending to the skies. Agave, I bring you your son. Reach out your arms.
One more section in which this chromelodian tuning motivates the music. This is earlier in the story. It is the premonition of the young son that he may die at the hands of his mother. I see two moons above me, I see two arms around me. I have said many times, and I am by no means the first to say it, that 12-tone equal temperament not only slams doors against any further investigation of consonance, but it also slams doors in the entire balance of the temple against any further investigation of dissonance. Dissonance on the piano and dissonance in a monophonic system of just intonation are entirely different servings of tapioca. I will approach the subject gently. In the coda of Oedipus, the resolution involves parts of true hexads, including a 33 identity, which is certainly dissonant, up to the penultimate. At the end, it is dissonant, monophonically dissonant. The coda to Revelation is the end of the recognition scene. The mother finally realizes that she has murdered her son. In the recording of this work, the poor little chromelodian, because of mic placement, is extinguished by percussion, plucked and beaten strings, and even a small brass band. However, the chromelodian holds the bones, the harmonic and melodic skeleton of the section. Here is the beginning of it, and the idea of two sounds under one lever or key, which I explained earlier, is extended here to 3 sounds under one lever in the highest register. Dissonances are frequent. Only occasionally is a chord a true monophonic hexad. But I emphasize these are just intonation dissonances, not 12-tone equal temperament dissonances, and in my opinion there is a vast difference. It is either very easy or very difficult to recline alongside dogma with serenity. I have seen through most of my life how lonely and contemplative investigation of musical human materials is discouraged by dogma. The doors that are closed because of education are the saddest doors that humanity never walked through. And there is at least the question whether the world has already known and long ago abandoned both habits of education and usages superior to those we currently adhere to. Now that we have suffered the present dogmas in the West for about 300 years, who would want to exchange them for a different set of rigid stipulations? I wouldn't. Responsible freedom, it seems to me, is the desideratum. The widely revered master-disciple concept represents, on both sides, too easy an escape into the limbo of no responsibility. I have said that if anyone calls himself a pupil of mine, I will happily strangle him. But this is simply the expression of an attitude, and amazingly, in the deeper meaning, it is an expression of hope.